experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the AZAPO online political education platform. My name is Simpiwe Ashe. I am with Comrade Nkosinathi Biko. We are going to be talking about Biko through Biko. The title of our discussion is Biko is Born Again. Catch us on our Facebook pages, the AZAPO Facebook page, as well as the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Gauteng Facebook pages. You can also catch us on the Wesley Guild South Africa's Facebook page, as well as their YouTube platform. So welcome, Comrade Nkosinathi, to this platform, and it's always great to have you here. You do not need any introduction to this movement of Biko, and I hope that the birthday cake that AZAPO celebrated yesterday was quite enjoyable.
Indeed.
Look, I mean, Nkosinathi Biko is the son of Bantu Biko. And, as you know, yesterday we celebrated the 75th anniversary of his birth. And it was great honor to have, Nkosinathi Biko as our guest yesterday. And today is a continuation of, that celebration, celebrating a life well lived and a life that we still continuing to study and understand. In as much as many say it was a short life, but it was a life that contributed a lot to the development of the philosophy of Black consciousness and to the development of thinking. And, that life continues to live through you, through all of us who are, believers in the philosophy of Black consciousness. We believe that this is the philosophy that every Black person should be subscribing to and should be believing to enable us to free our land and free our people. I'm going to ask Comrade Biko to give us his perspective and views on, this topic. Biko is born again, and it's going to be an interesting perspective that I look forward to listening to. Thank you. Comrade Nkosinathi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tawa. Towers, allow me first to express my gratitude for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Comrade Nelvis Kagema called me earlier in the week and informed me about the various activities that would be taking place to mark the 75th birthday of Comrade Bantu Biko. And these included today's webinar. And Comrade Ashe followed with the requisite detail to assist me in framing the remarks for our conversation. So I'm hugely indebted. I must start by thanking all those that have made this session a priority over other activities. I have worked for about 3 decades now in preserving our political heritage. And one of the enduring lessons I've learned over this period is that forgetfulness trumps memory all too often. Memory is the primary ingredient of what Paulo Freire called critical consciousness. And without memory, we stand to lose the link between yesterday and tomorrow. the ability that distinguishes us from animals. Therefore, as his family, we are indeed grateful that almost 5 decades after his death, his fellow comrades still make time to remember him, even for what sounds like a trivial issue as a birthday, 75 years ago. And as we do so, I think we must also recognize that if he was to be 75 today, then so are many of his colleagues. And unfortunately, we've lost many along the way, and some of them are ailing. And so as we start today, I would also like to wish Comrade Tlaku Rashidi a speedy recovery as he fights his way back to health. Allow me also to express our salutations on behalf of the family and the foundation to AZAPO following the elective conference of the 4th of December, 2021. Comrade Kagema has ascended to office as the first tower. Comrade Keketso Kema to the position of Deputy President. Comrade Ashe and Swepu to National Chairperson and Secretary General, respectively. And I do bring wishes also to all those who have been elected, and I counted some 47 odd positions that are in the Central Committee that will lead AZAPO as it delivers on its mandate between 2021 and 2025. I will not go through the list, as I understand that there are certain formalities that are to be completed. I must comment on 2 positive observations in respect of this list. First, it appears that there is a swing towards youthful leadership. Yesterday at the gathering in Soweto, I said that something has indeed changed if suddenly one finds themselves in the position where the incoming deputy president of AZAPO, Comrade Kema, and the Deputy Secretary for Publicity and Information, Comrade Dabula, could in fact be one's own daughters when assessed by age. This is something to be celebrated. The institutional foundation of Black consciousness is the South African Students' Organization. It was decidedly a youth formation, which became a fertile womb that birthed an assortment of vibrant political, professional, worker, religious, and cultural institutions. It must therefore be a continuing tradition of this movement to populate its structures with fearless, thoughtful young leadership. We must do this not only out of habit, we must do it because it is a necessity. If one has regard for the feedback by the IEC based on the local government elections that have just been, it appears that the percentage of voters who were under the age of 50 totals 65%. This is the number, 65% of the eligible voters. Thus, it appears therefore that the language of political power must be in the dialect of youth. The second observation worthy of mentioning is the glimmer of hope on the question of women leadership. The apparent progress on gender inclusivity must be acknowledged, and the furtherance thereof must be encouraged. It is the founding thrust of the Black consciousness movement to elect women to significant roles. Mama Winifred Mutlalipule became the first president of the Black People's Convention when she was elected as its first national conference, which was held on the 16th to the 17th of December in 1972. So I must repeat this. Exactly 49 years ago, Mehware became the first president, period. Not merely the first woman president of the Black People's Convention. She was following the footsteps of pioneers such as Dr. Vieira Mashalaba, who served as the SASO vice president alongside Steve Biko in 1969, She also served as Assistant General Secretary in 1970 under the leadership of President Bani Pityana at the time. And in the 8th sitting of SASO, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma replaced Dr. Diliza Mji, who had served as SASO Vice President in the interim SASO leadership of 1974. So one trusts that this history reminds us that the position of the founders of Black Consciousness Women on the role of youth and the role of women is unambiguous. In my discussions with President Kekema, we ended on the note that it's imperative in the new year to congregate in order to explore ways to re-energize the voice of Black consciousness and to make it more audible to our people. And I believe that the Steve Biko Center is home to arguably the deepest archives of the movement. It is therefore the natural home for such soul searching. It is your home, our home, and I do look forward to holding those discussions. I had been asked to reflect on the topic you outlined. Biko is born again through the lenses of a son, and the rest of my remarks will then focus on that, as well as perhaps advance a thesis for why the current lived reality of the majority of our people nourishes the rebirth of Biko. And then lastly, I want to propose 2 practical ways I believe the Black consciousness movement can find traction. This being a birthday, let me start with sharing a related personal anecdote. On the 9th of December, my last born, Tebucho, turned 7 years of age. As my wife, Lebu, and I, together with our 2 girls, Bukelo and Azola, pampered him during this special day, I was struck by the very important milestone that the moment signified in my family. Comrade Biko was 4 years old when his own father died. This is my grandfather, Zingai. He died in 1950 at the age of 36. Thus, Comrade Biko never quite knew his own father. I was 6.5 years of age when the Big Tower died in 1977 at the age of 30. I had just come to know him. Thus, as my son enjoyed his birthday, oblivious to the deeper significance, I felt fortunate that on that day, my family was quietly making history. The little tower had just become the first in 3 generations of men to reach the age of 7 with his father still alive at the age of 50. So by implication, we cannot speak of the Biko family without paying tribute to the women that have anchored this family such that it became triumphant over its adversities. So we must, as we gather, also tip our hats to my grandmother, Alice Nobuzola Biko, my mother, known as Ntiki. Their stories are stories we are yet to tell. And I'm also comforted in the knowledge that my own wife is cut from compatible cloth. My own relationship with Steve Biko as father and son began in around 1971, to be precise, the 11th of March. Following his death in 1977, our connection transcended into the ancestral spiritual realm. It was to transform materially around 1985 when I was about 14. On this occasion, I had just come back from school for a brief holiday. The country was in flames. It was during the time of the rolling mass action. And many of us will recall here that during that period, we lost many comrades through the so-called black on black violence, which was perpetuated against the Black consciousness movement, in particular by the United Democratic Front. And sometime during these holidays, I stood at the gate and I watched a toi-toi that was approaching our house from the eastern side of our street. And as they approached, the song slid into chant. Viva Tambo, Viva Mandela, and many others in the Congress tradition. And then very quickly, Phansi Ngosebe, Phansi Ngomatanzima, Phansi Steve Biko. Now, I have never wanted to be rattled easily. I retreated to the house and to chew on what I had just witnessed, only to catch a glimpse of Sisiki at the door. Several leaders of the march were persons known to us. And that evening, one by one, they came to the house to distance themselves from the chants. And the reason for this is that they were beneficiaries of the Ginsberg Education Trust, which later became Zingisa, as well as many other initiatives that were started by the Black Consciousness Movement. And they would regularly come to our home to access related benefits. In fortifying my spirit, my mother said to me, and I quote, "My son, to get through life, you have to learn to be like a raincoat. There will be many showers, but let not your soul be shattered." Perhaps more than murder in 1977, that incident, which to me was a shameless act of betrayal, became the single biggest motivation for what became my life mission. And I vowed on that day that I would dedicate my life to defending the rightful place of Steve Biko and Black consciousness in our history. And I began to engross myself in his writings, as well as in the memories of those that knew him. Now, because of time, I will avoid a lengthy citation of his biography, which I'm happy to do on a different day. I just want to focus perhaps on two forces that I believe made the Steve Biko that became one of the primary leaders of a more radical, audible voice of resistance. The first is the lived reality of his people, the appalling conditions that he would have witnessed in his daily life, which differed from the life he caught on an occasional glimpse across the railway line. His mother crossed this line daily to provide her services as a domestic at the local hospital. The second major force that changed him came later on in life, although the seeds were planted in the 1960s. It was this growing frustration in liberation circles with liberal politics. The liberal discourse gave lip service to the fight against apartheid whilst insisting on being the mouthpiece of the oppressed. But it was in 1963 that I believe his Damascus moment came about. At the age of 15, Steve Biko was admitted to Lovedale College, a missionary institution at which his brother Kaya had enrolled a year earlier. And later that year, the two of them, along with 50 other learners, were interrogated. In fact, the others ended up being arrested on suspicion that they were supporters of the outlawed Pan-African Congress aligned Boko. And Steve Biko was interrogated by the police, and despite the lack of evidence that he had any political inclinations, he was subsequently expelled and blacklisted from all government schools. Kaya was imprisoned on suspicion that he was a member of the PAC, and thus Biko began a resentment for authority. And Kaya describes this moment as the moment when the great giant was awakened. By Steve Biko's own admission, he says this subsequently at the SASO BPC trial, that from that moment onwards, I hated authority like hell. So the 1963 incident had a truly profound influence on his outlook. He felt that the school had reacted with impotence to the arrest of innocent students, although it purported to be on the side of truth, and it pronounced all the promises and the poetry of the liberal doctrine. He had spent considerable time after he was expelled from school delivering food and other supplies to his brother and his comrades in prison. And these developments were the baptism And I think he ultimately responded to the prodding of Kaya and others from that moment, the prodding to take interest in politics. On completion of his matric at St. Francis College, he registered for a medical degree at the University of Natal's Black section. And like Lovedale, the university professed liberalism and was indeed home to the leading intellectuals of that tradition. And at Natal, he hit the ground running. He was influenced by and in turn influenced that dynamic environment. He was elected to serve on the SRC in 1966 in the year of his admission. And although he initially supported the multiracial student groupings, principally NUSAS, a number of voices, including him, subsequently opposed NUSAS to form the South African Students Organization. And it was out of this frustration with the liberal doctrine that SASO was born. Now, SASO brought with it a new political identity that united all of us who were oppressed culturally, economically, and politically as a group. And it presented a vocabulary for us to reimagine ourselves. It reminded us that our humanity is bestowed upon us through birth, and that none should hold dominion over us by virtue of us being born Black. It challenged us that to allow such to go unopposed is to be complicit in our own subjugation. And in a nutshell, that is the gift of Black consciousness to which Biko directed the remaining days of his life. Now, the notion of being reborn again conjures up, in my view, two sentiments. The first is that of a religious kind. A few years ago, I was approached by Comrade Opangwenya to advise me that he and several others will be campaigning for the canonization of Biko. Since then, and whether directly or indirectly, such efforts have resulted in the Anglican Church being the first to enlist Biko as one of the martyrs on its annual calendar. Accordingly, beginning this year, every Sunday closest to September 12th, congregants will observe the life and the lessons of Biko as a matter of hope. Now, one first encounters this sentiment of defining Biko as a Christian-like martyr in Alred Stubbs' memoirs contained in the first edition of I Write What I Like, which was published in 1978 by Bowden Press. And I've also witnessed this near spiritual chant of his name as artists, poets, and playwrights chalk their artistic and creative yield up to his influence. In the latest version of his song Biko, which was released in 1980 for the first time, and which was recently re-recorded as part of an initiative called Playing for Change, Peter Gabriel rounds up artists around the world, including a group in Cape Town called the Cape Ensemble, Angelique Kidjo of Benin, the American cellist Yo-Yo Ma, the German-born bassist Michel Digescielo, and musician Sebastian Robinson, among others. And they jointly echo his name across the oceans. If this production doesn't move you, then you cannot possibly be moved. But what would Biko have made of all of this fuss about him as a martyr, as a spiritual figure? First, I think it's evident in his own writings that although he was a product of institutionalized religion, he was also a strong critic, thereof. He offered insights in the article, The Church as Seen by a Young Layman, as well as in some of the private correspondence with friends, especially religious friends such as Alred Stubbs and the late David Russell. Indeed, under the auspices of the Black consciousness movement, Black theology emerged as an antithesis to apartheid theology that was espoused by the state and institutions such as the Dutch Reformed Church. But perhaps the ultimate ordinance on how Biko should be invoked in the spiritual context is in his own words. And he says, and I quote, "If God was not there, it would be necessary to create one." And elsewhere he continues, "Though probably useful and potentially much more useful, organized worship, I feel, is not a prerequisite for proximity to God." And then lastly, he says, "I would like to remind the Black ministry, and indeed all Black people, that God is not in the habit of coming down from heaven to solve people's problems on earth." Thus, in his own words, Biko directs us to the second meaning of being born again. He reminds us that any call to prayer or any song, including one in his name, must by necessity be a call to action. Such a call must rouse our citizens to avail themselves to history, for history to work through them. Those are his words. At the core of this call should be the objective of promoting a consciousness of self and a connection to the remaining struggles of our people. Therefore, to define oneself as a proponent of Black consciousness is to commit self to much more than mastering the recitation of the ideas of Biko and the ideas of Black consciousness. It is to position oneself as a vehicle for change. This is what it means to be a tower. And one cannot claim to be a tower when their ideas are delinked from social action. To tower is to do right by our people. And the term is not merely a noun, it is a verb. And indeed, there is no lack of causes to transform South Africa to the envisaged Azania. Now, it's useful just to reflect a little on the conditions I believe that exist that are ripe for the rebirth of Black consciousness. Despite 27 years of democracy, South Africa holds the unenviable record of being the most unequal society in the world. So economists use the measure called the Gini coefficient. It's a number between 0 and 1. 0 represents inequality, extreme equality. 1 is extreme inequality. We are 0.63, right? And the highest unequal society in the world. And this is based on an assessment that was done in 2014. In 2018, Stats SA paints a gruesome picture of the second evil that goes with inequality. This is poverty. By 2018, our democracy had relegated 55%, roughly 30 million people, to poverty. Of more concern are the diminishing prospects of getting our people out of this run. COVID has decimated livelihoods, and I believe that, in fact, that statistic, which was 55% in 2018, is now 57%. So poverty and inequality persist despite the fact that this is relatively a rich country whose economy ranks second in Africa and 33rd in the world. Now, this poverty and this inequality also has a face, and Vusi Gumede does out of the University of Mpumalanga study, which he looks at the nuances of this, and he finds that poverty is indeed Black and principally African, and he comments on a second finding, which is the feminization of poverty. It affects women the most, and then of course the third one, that it is a rural phenomenon. And here you begin to see some contradictions. The ruling party's only remaining power base is the rural people, and these are the worst off. It's against this background that the behavior of our citizens must be examined by those who have political aspirations. The very purpose of democracy is for citizens to improve their lot through the ballot. However, despite increasing poverty and inequality, our people have simply elected to abandon the ballot. So out of the 26 million registered voters in the last election, by 5 o'clock, 8 million people had voted. And this is the lowest turnout, we believe, since 1994. In a study by Runciman and Becker of the University of Johannesburg, the 5 primary reasons for voter abstention are listed as follows. The first is individual barriers. This is people not being registered or being at work or being busy. It's 34%, they didn't vote. Administrative barriers, not having an ID, it's about 22%. Service delivery and corruption, 19%. Lack of interest and or disillusionment with voting, 17%. And then, of course, lack of political alignment, about 4%. The study shows that the voters are also unlikely to be more than the age of 35. So it's young voters that are abandoning the process. It's clear that the liberation of our people is a dream deferred. And it remains true that if ever the current generation of South Africans had a mission, it would be to be the midwives of the total emancipation, particularly total economic emancipation of our people. Caught between the legacy of the past and the promise of the future, the current generation of leaders must find enduring practical solutions in order to ensure that an increasing number of South Africans are rescued from the periphery of our economy, especially, as I have indicated, the women and rural citizens. So against this background, it's evident that the socio-economic conditions are ripe for rebirth of Biko. As was demonstrated earlier in the year with the incidents in Gauteng and in Natal, peace and security hang precariously over the embers of discontent in our country. So my last comment then are really about how we seize the baton. The evidence I've listed above shows the abysmal conditions of the Black majority. But despite this, the electorate is not charmed by the current offering of the political left. Black consciousness-aligned organizations, such as AZAPO and SOPA, have performed dismally in the elections. And some of the reasons include lack of resources. Others take it back to the strategic choice to abandon the 1994 elections. Notwithstanding the reasons and the accuracy of that analysis, this is the reality of what the current leadership inherits. So I want to conclude as follows. One of the things that made SASO and BPC vibrant was the fact that in many respects, they were new political formations. The culture, therefore, was of placing emphasis on generating new ideas. It was not a culture of recital of the old. This forced the organization to examine with sincerity what it means to be relevant and what it means to be responsive. While history is important, it alone is not sufficient to make AZAPO a modern organization. It does not matter what Steve Biko, Mohapi, Mieza, Tiro, and others said, if it is disconnected from the answers people are searching for to overcome their contemporary challenges. What matters is what they would say in the here and in the now. So for Biko to be reborn, AZAPO must move beyond being a burial society. It must reclaim its identity as a midwife of change. It must give birth to new ideas inspired by its tradition. It must move beyond vigor alone to engage rigor in its approach. By way of example, I've argued elsewhere that the land question is historically steeped in the agrarian context. But today, South Africa has a population of which 67% is in the urban space And very soon, 80%, more than 80% will be in the urban space. So the land question includes agricultural land, but has developed a new front, ownership of the urban space. This means that housing and related property issues are the new parlance for the land question. These are some of the issues that should be playing out on the manifestos. Following his banning in 1973, Biko helped set up the King Williamstown Office of the Black Community Program. He served as the branch executive. The organization focused on projects in health, education, job creation, and other areas of development. And notwithstanding many challenges, the office did well, managing, among other achievements, to build and operate Zanimpilo Clinic, the most advanced community healthcare center of its time. And other projects included Njwaka Leather Works Project, a community crash, and a number of other initiatives. He was also instrumental in founding in 1975 the Zimele Trust Fund to assist political prisoners and their families, as well as the Ginsberg Educational Trust referred to above. He built what other staffs described as a showcase for community development. Thus, the second tradition of the Black consciousness movement is to take ideas and give them practical expression. Our people need ideas. Our people need action. And Christ is not in the habit of coming down to solve our issues. So may the new era of AZAPO and the commencement of the term of the new office signify the conception of new ideas and the gestation of a culture of action. And may Biko's birthday be a trigger for his tradition to be born again in all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Matao.
Thank you, Comrade Biko, for the profound contribution there. And you said those were opening remarks, but it seemed beyond the remark, but more of a reflection really on what has been happening in society, but more profoundly, what we should be listening to as members of this Black consciousness family. So thank you for that contribution, and we really appreciate the feedback. Maybe before we allow engagement with the audience that is connected, I'm just interested in a few things that I want you to comment on. Is number one, you found it necessary back in 1985 to commit yourself at an early age to defending the legacy of Steve Biko and his Black consciousness. And generally, I mean, youth of that age tend to want to do what they think is good for themselves. And they tend to, sometimes even reject the teachings of the family and go and find things, that would enable them to express themselves the way they want, without, that feeling of wanting to defend my parents' legacy, my father's legacy, or continuing with those teachings, largely because you want to go out to society and find what resonates with you as a person, and not necessarily what should be, only the teachings coming from the family. Why did you find it necessary that you needed to defend the legacy of your father? And because, I'm talking of this dissonance that tends to exist, more especially amongst the young people. And, every time they come home, they fight with their parents, largely because they are so disagreed to the views that the parents hold. And with you, the views that are there from your father are what is written and what is recorded. You have not had the opportunity of engaging your father on his views, literally, and maybe that engagement was more spiritual. And so what would be your comment on, the need for you to want to defend that legacy and not define a legacy of your own as a son of Biko?
Yeah, thank you, Tawa. It's true. I think that there is often a conflict between the interplay between one generation and the next. And I suspect probably that if Steve Biko had lived longer, we probably would have arrived at our own kind of conflict around that particular matter, right?
I can imagine.
I do what I do in the knowledge also that he would have wished for his children. And by that, I mean not just his biological children, I mean the next generation, to fight a different set of battles altogether. Regrettably, just the analysis that I was using as part of our backdrop shows that the luxury of being indifferent to the quest to free our people is one that we do not enjoy.
Yeah.
So in the manner in which we discuss this thing in the context of my work, Steve Biko is a backdrop, but really we are concerned about the things that would be of concern to him. And in doing so, hopefully we can continue to make his relevant also relevant. So it's not an obsession with him per se, but the
his
ideas.
ideas.
Yes. And I have, in approaching it that way, found less of a conflict than I guess would have ordinarily been. But I also must say that I have witnessed just this gathering here is a gathering of people that would have been inspired by Steve Biko. So what chance did some of us have of not being inspired by him, particularly given the proximity, right? And I've witnessed this even around the world in places like Brazil. Someone, our ambassador in Brazil, wrote about the Cultural Institute there that's doing great work, or the Steve Biko Association in Liverpool, which was a gateway of the trade movement, and many, many other spheres around the world where he has had influence. So I guess some of that would have had to rub off even at home.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. You also spoke of the disconnect that is there between, I'm not sure if it is between, you see it as between, AZAPO and the people, or is it between this enduring, philosophy of Black consciousness and the people? And, juxtapose that against the correctness of, the BC movement in the analysis of the obtaining conditions over time. And if you trace back, the contribution of the Black consciousness movement in terms of, the practical work it did and the analysis of society and the solutions to the problems that afflict us, you cannot but wonder how, did these guys, do this so correctly and yet find it very difficult to connect with the people. Why? What do you put that to? That disconnect, between this enduring philosophy, or is the disconnect between the philosophy and the people? But some of us continue to say that there's a lot of connection and resonance between, more especially the younger folk, with the philosophy of Black consciousness, but that does not transcend and translate itself to those young people swelling the ranks of the Black consciousness movement and causing them to advance, the interests of Biko and his movement.
Yes. So I suppose that one would have to go back to the original argument, the argument whether or not the strategy should have been to land a movement, or whether to take that aspiration to the point of a political organization, right? And those who were part of those debates, I guess, would even have better insight. But I think if you then look at what happened, is that what started as SASO ended up by 1978, when you look at just the broad network of organizations that were banned, being a movement in the absolute sense. So there's a sense in which the ideas were always larger than the membership of just the political elements within the movement, right? And I think that this is probably why it is that we have this kind of, it's almost like a schizophrenic relationship with the ideas of Black consciousness, where we see it and we feel it. I mean, if you look in South Africa now, churches such as Zion Christian Church and many, many others are churches in that kind of tradition, right? And you go beyond that, you will see it in other spaces, in the cultural spaces, the lines that young artists are coining and so forth, but it does not necessarily translate into membership for the organization in the way that we want to see it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yes. So there is this schizophrenic thing, but I don't think this is a problem. And of course, I speak frankly here because this is partly a family conversation. But it's not just a problem facing AZAPO. If we just look at it's a problem that seems to face a number of other political entities also in this space. So take, for instance, the latest addition to crowd this space, which seems to, or argues to have taken elements of Black consciousness. It's a cry by Julius that all the time he sees people that are excited, that rush to his party, that want him to help or the party to help him in one or other matter, but it never translates come elections. And perhaps the strategy then is to find a dual focus, which is to keep this alive, but to find ways in which people can use it as a political instrument, because the field of play that we have as the public is only the elections. That's where we really have the conduit for our ideas and our philosophies, and to bring into power the people that matter.
And I think that's isn't that where the problem is, perhaps, that the conduit is only through elections, because we have always understood Black consciousness to be an action-oriented philosophy that really is not dependent on parliamentary processes or elections processes. I mean, take, for instance, the work that you are doing with the Steve Biko Foundation, which are really inspired by Black consciousness. And one wonders why it is that you don't find a multiplication of programs and activities by people who claim to, be influenced by, the philosophy of Black consciousness, by Biko's ideas and all of those, and continue to evolve the philosophy of Black consciousness and its legacy, and continue to change, the face of society as we now know it, and shape it to, the desires of Black people insofar as, the liberation of people is concerned. Because our liberation really should not be dependent on what happens in Parliament. It should be, driven from a community base. It should be driven from, the mass base. And those people, once inspired and imbued with the philosophy of Black consciousness, should just rise by themselves and say, look, we cannot allow, a country to descend into, this inequality that we see. I mean, you spoke of the Gini coefficient of 0.63, which is really speaking to the fact that you don't need anybody else to tell you that you need to, commit yourself to struggle, and struggling not for anyone else but for yourself, and participating in the liberation of your own people, including yourself. Yeah. Why is it so difficult for those people, more especially the under 35s, to commit themselves to real struggle, in your view?
Yeah. Well, two things. First, I must comment about the interplay between community level organization and the political process, the elections in particular. I think it's not a question of either or. I think we must get both those elements of our democracy correct, because I think, for instance, if you look at what has happened in our country over the past decade and a half, is that in fact the regression has happened through the weaknesses of the parliamentary process or the elections process. It has brought about representatives that have allowed a culture where our coffers and the coffers of the state can be pilferaged, right down to practices such as our wealth being exported to listings internationally at the cost of our own economy, and a whole range of decisions that are made out of that forum. So that, I think, is something we must get correct, right? The second one is, of course, through community organization. And there, I think that in the past, what we were able to do is to get citizens to be engaged more actively in entrenching, well, it was freedom then. But I think that after 1994, we began to defer to our political leadership and we kind of disengaged. It's not to say that we are not as active. We are also known as the protest capital of the world. Perhaps our form of action in South Africa is protest. We have upward of 2,000 protests annually.
Yes.
And it is a part of who we are. What I think maybe offers us some opportunities is a trend that we started seeing happening at universities. And I think we saw a little bit of it in the last elections, and we may see more of it because of that judgment or that ruling by Judge Madlanga, right? So going back a few years, we started seeing at university the rise of independence. We saw a lot of that in the local government election. Perhaps one of the things that is an opportunity in an environment like that is to take to the independents the packages, the nuggets of priorities that should be part of our culture. That would be, and then Moses' strategy has been to try and work around these independents and kind of spread his wings over them as his strategy going forward. I suspect that if it is good for that goose, then it must be good for other genders too.
Well, I hear you. I'm in conversation with Nkosinathi Biko, the son of Stephen Bantu Biko. If you are keen to engage with us in this conversation, you're more than welcome to drop your comments on the chat and ask your questions via the Q&A tab. And those of you who are joining us on Facebook, more than welcome to ask your questions there. And those who are with us in this house, you're more than welcome to raise your hands and make a contribution or ask any question of your liking. And I see here's the first hand, Bongani Kocha. If you can just unmute and make a contribution. There you are.
Jabulela Mkali National, Jabulela. Ngolusuku lukatata uBiko. Utata umkhulu lowo. Kuthiwa ebena 75 years esaphila ukuba ebesaphila. At one time bedise Rhodes University. Dadibana nezinye professors pha. Dazijonga ezi professors ndafumanisa intoba ezinye zingaba zintanga yakaSteve Biko. Ndafumanisa uba uSteve Biko zange achoose the easy life abayichuzayo bona ngelo xesha. Wachuza ukuba yi-activist. So when I see some of them, ndiyababona kodwa ndifumanisa into yokuba uSteve zange achoose life elula. He didn't take the easy route. Uba ngabantu besithetha ngeBhayibhile, he didn't take indlela ebanzi, uthathe indlela emxinwa. Now, Bendifuna ke sithi xa sithetha ke mhlali kunye no-Comrade Comrade Nko, funeke wazi into yoba sikuthanda kakhulu kwaZAPO njengezinye ii-comrades. Siluthanda kakhulu usapho lwakho. Funeka uyazi loo nto le, silixabisile kakhulu. Umhle umsebenzi wenzayo foundation, Biko Foundation. Sicale ke uqhubekeke wenze njalo. I-comment yam would be on what I would regard as what we would have defined as liberation for this country. If AZAPO can do that and tell Black people what they thought this liberation would be like, I would be happy. Because when we communicate those ideas, it means then that people will be attracted to AZAPO, like bees are attracted to nectar. Now, if we fail to define that kind of liberation that we thought we would have, the same kind of liberation that Biko had and his peers in his mind and was articulated in those early BC papers. When I say that again, it was articulated in those early BC papers. Then it means people would then understand where AZAPO stands. So, for example, just one bit before the Nkalephans, the issue of land. And I'm happy that we have announced on this matter, in particular, a distinction between the legal definition of what is regarded as land restitution vis-a-vis land reconquest. And I would be happy also if we can touch all aspects of property, not just land, but all aspects of property, so that when we go to our people and articulate this matter, we are able to say today, after the introduction of title deedship, if you like, after the introduction of all property laws in this country, why were they introduced? Because some of them now are protecting the same property that was stolen. So if you now go and say that you are claiming land, whether it's commercial land, whether it's residential land, whether it's industrial land, whether it's land above the land, that is the air, the airspace above the land, and the ocean economy. So we must articulate those positions so that we're able to say, if AZAPO takes power, what would it do in terms of manifesting what they would call a land reconquest in all those aspects of property? I would be happy if we can talk about those issues, because they also open up the avenue. You could understand that kind of liberation AZAPO, including Biko and his peers, spoke about or referred to.
No, thanks, Comrade Bongani there. And but most of your questions are largely directed at AZAPO, not so much at Comrade Nkosinathi. And I'm sure at the appropriate time, AZAPO will be able to engage you on those matters and be able to pronounce on such. So I would suggest that you do raise them at the appropriate AZAPO platforms so that we can be able to respond appropriately to you. But it does not really absolve Comrade Nkosinathi from commenting on some of the aspects of your question. And I hear Subongi says, defending a legacy is different from enjoying it. And maybe it means a journey not completed. And we are then tasked with the responsibility to ensure that we complete the human face project and kill the inequality you just alluded to. ensure that this and the next generation enjoy the legacy of Biko. And yes, Nkululeko saying, Kameda has made reference to BCE. I personally experienced Njoaka and Lovedale Leather Works projects. Can we pick up the baton and implement same in our villages and link these to the Biko Center? So maybe comment, Nkosinathi, on those.
Yes, thank you, my tower. First, I agree with the sentiment by Sibongile. I do think that this is ongoing work, and so I agree with that sentiment. On the question of land, this is an issue I am particularly interested in, and even this idea of looking land in the broader sense and looking at it as a property question. I may just share with those that are participating that my base academic training is in economics. I'm an economist who went on to study property studies, property development in particular. And one of the things that they tell us is that the property space, the value of property in South Africa, including land that is developed or undeveloped, is 8 trillion rand, right? And so it's one of the biggest chunks, and we know that all people and all businesses are underpinned by, or should be underpinned by, property, because we know there's homelessness also, right? So it really is something that we should regard as a serious battlefront, looking at the land question or the property question, and doing our best to wage our struggles. Now, here is an interesting statistic. If you look just at developed land, developed properties, the ultimate value is locked up within 1% of our land mass, right? So if you take the footprint of South Africa, ignore 99%, within 1% of that land mass and that land mass is the urban space. That's why I keep going back to this notion of the urban space. So we are missing the land question if we can't take it to that and to look at what we can do to advance our people's agenda in respect of ownership, also of the urban space. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying farms are off the table. They're very important. But this is a new front that we must also not lose sight of. And on the question, on the proposal by Mr. Somhlahlo, that's a comrade I know very well who does incredible development work in the Eastern Cape. You will know, in fact, that the curio shop at the center is named Njoaka in the tradition of the Njoaka Leather Works project. And we source our supplies from people that are doing arts and crafts there. And we should certainly talk about that and find other ways to bring value to that space. Thank you.
No, thank you. Just a couple of comments. Thank you from Chris Webb. Thank you, Nkosinathi, for your dedication to the cause and for preserving the name of our matter and the BC philosophy. We must and will work very closely with the foundation. Biko lives, and here's Dr. Halane saying, if young people resonate with Biko, but not so much with AZAPO, where is the real disconnect in the present day? What must the current leadership do in practical terms to get this translate to electoral support? Or is BC a mere important transversal liberation theoretical tool like decolonization and indigenous knowledge system that belongs to all Black life despite political affiliation? And Nkululeko says, well, 1994 was an omen against revolutionary activism. And across the left political spectrum, let's rid ourselves of that curse. So those are some of the comments that are coming through, and we really appreciate your comments. And let me just check if any new comments. Yes, Tandulwe too. Thank you, Mr. Biko and AZAPO, for this conversation. I have two questions. Why has Black consciousness not translated into government policy and legislation? even though many of Biko's colleagues have become leaders at top levels of government, whether as vice chancellors, presidential advisors, consultants, boards of executives, what must be done to bring Black consciousness and Pan-Africanism back on the agenda and at the center stage of Azanian politics? So those are some of the comments that are coming through via the chat room, as well as our Facebook pages. It's very interesting that you speak about the land question in pockets. We look at the agrarian, and then we look at the urban resettlements. And why don't we speak about the land in its totality and look at what it is that we need to do? Because that narrative, it seems to have been the drive more from your liberal forces, saying, well, if you want to talk about land, there are pockets of land, as if those pockets were not the pockets that were created for us and forced upon us, to use. And, as and when we talk land, we seem to be forced to talk about certain pockets and not, those areas where the commanding heights of economy are present. We don't talk about the gold mines. We don't talk about, all of the land that has got the mineral resources of our country. We seem to be reducing the land question to just, building houses and, roads and stuff like that, and not talk about the fact that the real struggle and the reason why we are in struggle and the real power is in getting our land back. Because when we're saying we are fighting for power and we are fighting for our liberation, we're actually fighting for our land, because that's where our dignity is. And once we get, access to our land, we can then be able to do of it some of the things that you mentioned, with regards to agrarian reforms, or, the urban resettlements and so forth. Comments?
Yes. No. I am actually chewing on the submission you make. It is indeed important that we are alive to all of the elements that are penned to land. I think that different elements will require us to wage different struggles. So take, for instance, the issue of mining land. You know that many years ago, what did happen under the New Democracy is that the mining rights were stripped away and located deeper within the state. So the right to mine the land. So in theory, in South Africa now, you own the land and everything above it, and then what sits beneath it is supposedly guarded by the state instruments. The award of those opportunities is then what becomes the issue that we should focus on. And you are quite correct. In 27 years, we have not seen a change of pattern around the award of mining rights that depicts an Azania. It still depicts a South Africa. So I agree with you and that sentiment.
All right. I don't see any further hands. What I want to go back to is, this issue of, Biko being reborn or being born again. And you made reference to, the biblical sense of being reborn or being born again. And some would say that it is not possible for Biko to be born again, largely because Biko never died, and largely because his ideas never died, and they continued to live, beyond, September 12, 1977. And I hear you saying that Biko is reborn, through the work that we are doing, and through a lot of young people who are growing up, claiming Black consciousness as their torch to see their future. Would you agree with me that we see the rebirth of Biko as effectively the rebirthing of Black consciousness through the multiplication that we see happening in all of the young people who claim to, subscribe to this philosophy. And now the real question is, how do we then translate, this claim to real activism?
Yeah. Well, it may not. It may be true that Biko never died, but I think we must also be very clear that Biko has not always thrived. I think in the period between 1977 and now, we see multiple waves. I referred elsewhere to a wave where not only was he being killed from history, those who associated themselves with his ideas were being literally killed for that alone, right? And there have been different stages in our life cycle as a country at which we've related to Biko differently. I mean, some of us will still recall campaigns led by some of the senior leadership within the ANC around Black consciousness and Biko as being an agent of this or that, the kind of campaign that you still have seen. So that's the one stage, right? And then just because we see young people wear the face of Biko, or it also does not mean that they are familiar with Biko. There is such a thing as a bled icon, right? And a very good example of that is Che Guevara, where the very, very advanced on one's chest, and it makes you look like a knowledgeable person, but there really is no substance beyond the image that people are wearing on their chest. So part of what we need to do is that interest, that's somewhat superficial interest, as a gateway to deepen people's appreciation of Biko and his ideas. I do think the avenue for that was young people. There is a cohort of young people that have become studious and that have spent time, and I think we should build around them the capacity that we want to see.
No, thanks for that. And I think we're moving closer to our closing. And let me just check more comments that are coming through. Okay, what would it take to translate the teachings of Steve Biko into languages of our people? The philosophy was not backed by action to make it alive to those who find it appealing. There were no coherent political engagement other than activities approaching elections, and there was no appreciation that those who find the philosophy appealing would not all become public representatives, and there were no projects to bring to life the philosophy that will make the youth and even those who are older to feel ownership of the philosophy. I just hope that we can cast the organization into a new one that addresses all those issues. Here's another comment from Mandisi saying, thanks comrades for a wonderful conversation. The meeting between our leadership and Tamila should happen. So, as among other things, to plan for the 45th anniversary program together, or at least cooperate. And here's Comrade Khaundi Bale saying, as a follow-up to Comrade Mashabela's contribution, Masitete and Black consciousness in indigenous languages. For instance, what is Black consciousness in isiXhosa and Setswana and so forth? He wants our comments, and thank you for saying it as it is. Demonizing of Biko made him die, in a sense. So these are some of the comments that have come through, referring to, the period that you're talking about where Biko was labeled a CIA agent and Biko was demonized. And, throughout that period from 1977, more especially that period of that decade from 1977 to 1987 particularly, Biko was so demonized that it was even difficult to mention his name. Any comments?
Yes, maybe just to pick up on on the issue of language. So one of the practical responses to that suggestion is a process that has been underway. So a few years back, we began through Professor Peter Mtuze, those of us are familiar, to translate I Write What I Like, so into a book, the working title, and Ndibhala Endikuthandayo. And we have then taken that work, and through the support of people like Professor Sasand and others, we've gone through various layers of this to try and refine it, because there's a distinction between presenting it in isiXhosa and presenting Black consciousness in isiXhosa. So linguistic purity extract from the political essence. And so we are trying to do that reconciliation. We actually are not far away from completing that process and publishing it. And one hopes that it will then take us to other of our local languages.
Okay.
And we do this because it's already been done in other languages, Portuguese and Korean and a whole range of others. They have done it, and we have failed to move on this question when we possess the skills to do so.
All right, here's a question from somebody, and let me just, if you can just unmute and make your comment. This is Galaxy A3 Core. Yes, please.
Yes, you're speaking to David Pasekanoa here from Gauteng.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it difficult when we are talking about the land, but we're not talking about the resources. Because we can have the land, but if we don't have the resources of this land, it means we have nothing. We must take it for an example, since they taken our land from 1652 till today. Where are those resources? That is why even today, the government of today is struggling so much, because they claim to have the power, whereas they have the land, whereby all the resources are still on the hands of the minority, the oppressors. That is why today we tend to blame them, but we blame them for nothing because of the agreement they did during the 1994 World Trade Center agreement. That is where the difficulty comes from. I thank for
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. And Nodaba.
Thank you, Ntate Hashe. Thank you, Ntate Nkosinathi Biko. This is Nodaba, the National Publicity Secretary of AZAPO. There's something that has been bothering me, Comrade Nkosinathi. This narrative that comes from young journalists, whenever they would be interviewing comrades, like even, for instance, yesterday when they interviewed two comrades, I think it's Nkitama and Mbele. The line that they take is Steve Biko as an anti-apartheid activist, you know, and that refrain, Comrade Nkosinathi, goes through their line of questioning. Now, I would like you to assist us, particularly when we look at the work of the Steve Biko Foundation. Can we really characterize Ntate Bantu Biko as an anti-apartheid activist? Or is Ntate Stephen Bantu Biko, his work and his comrades and colleagues, and also the work of the foundation, isn't it about attaining liberation in its true sense? Because about apartheid, when you go, for instance, to the Azanian Manifesto, and I think the Mafikeng document that AZAPO, the Black Consciousness Movement, had, Ntate Biko in his own writing says apartheid is but just one of those issues, if you need to use a metaphor, to say apartheid is like the coat. So The anti-apartheid movement wanted us to believe that if you take off the coat, you are sorted. The Black consciousness movement said the problem is not the coat, but the owner of the coat. So that's what you need to deal with. And the problem then becomes capitalism. It becomes colonialism. Hence, the outlook was socialist of the Black consciousness movement by its own inception. So I want you to take us through that particular worrying part. And I am going to address it from the publicity desk of AZAPO, but I just want you to just share your thoughts about it. Is it doing justice to characterize Ntate Biko as an anti-apartheid activist? Ndiyabulela Mhlekazi. Nkosinathi Ashe.
Thank you, Nadova. And maybe comments on those issues, Comrade.
Yes, Enkosi Mhlekazi. Igangathi into encinci lo ibuzayo. Kanti ngumahluko omkhulu. It's in one of two conversations. Either the 1972 conversation with Gail Gerhardt, alternatively in the evidence in the SASO BBC trial, I can't recall off the top of my head, where he says, if you were to describe me, then I suppose you would say I am a freedom fighter. That's what he says in his own words. And I think that it is because apartheid as a system itself is not just the foundation of our problems as a people. I think that our problems precede apartheid, and at least as a formal system. And our problems will have long outlived apartheid as a formalized system, because we have to root out, to use his other words, we have to redress the table. We have to strip it and dress it up in African regalia, and then invite whosoever wishes to be a guest at that table. So the short answer to your comment is that a more accurate way of defining Steve Biko is that you would have to call him a freedom fighter, with all of course the nuances that go with that. Just the comment around resources. I think one of the ways in which we will advance ourselves is to reframe some of the language that we use. I want to make use of a comparison used in Zimbabwe, for instance, when we talk about what we call in South Africa Black economic empowerment. So when we say in South Africa BEE, it's almost like it has become a swear word these days.
Is actually.
And it leaves a trace whereby one can make the assumption that there is some person, probably a white person, who is tasked with the responsibility of empowering some Black person. And you can see what you are conceding as you go through that narrative, where the one has power and the other not. And so it's not uncommon that you will be in a boardroom and there will be two people, one Black, one white, who are engineers and graduates of the same university. And the one who is white thinks that they can empower the other. It's a strange phenomenon. So Zimbabwe uses a different approach to this. And they say it's indigenization. And from the onset, what that means is that the entity that wants to be regarded as Zimbabwe, or the entity that wants to be regarded as Azanian, must accept that from the onset they are not until they comply with certain conditions. It's a different mindset altogether, but certainly one that says we have a hell of a lot of power that we can use to transform our society. If you take that narrative to the economics of this country, something happened during the COVID era, which showed us that although Black people on a per capita basis are not wealthy, as a collective, and given that they are 82% of the economy, they are the key drivers of this economy. Their collective buying power, it was what gives juice to our economy. So when the president says you must stay at home, you can't be at work or shop whatever it is, he is effectively pulling away from the economy this immense buying power. And as a result, companies that we thought were powerful, rich companies were on their knees in no more than 2 months, right? And I think that if we follow the power that we have, if we follow the money that we have, we can approach this discourse on transforming our country differently from a position of substantial power rather than a position of being at the table.
No, thanks, Nkosinathi. Tawa, just maybe one or two questions or last question. I think this one is really for you. When we look at Nkosinathi Biko, are we looking at Nkosinathi Biko, the son of Steve Biko, who is interested in defending the legacy of Black consciousness and therefore has seen his life to be an embodiment of that which his father was a participant in? Or are we seeing Nkosinathi Biko as a Black consciousness activist who happens to be the son of Stephen Bantu Biko? Or both?
Well, Tawa, as you asked that question, I noticed that you are sporting a shade of gray on your chin. And my gray is, I think it's ahead of yours, right? I long got to a point where I refuse to see myself even as a son of anybody. So when you ask me to reflect on Biko as a son, you will instantly see that I sneak in my own son. So
I saw that.
Biko as the grandfather of my children, rather than as I am not beholden to those issues. For me, I really am secure in my relationship, first of all, with Steve Biko, and then secondly, with my own ideas. The way that I have elected to go back to the term defend is, in fact, to try as best I can to amass our history and place it out there so that young scholars and researchers can make of it what they will, right? What disturbs me is the obliteration of our history, period.
Yes.
So we have a museum and we have a library and archives that are entrenching the history of Black consciousness. That is different from me interpreting that history. Now, I am quite capable of interpreting that history. I do think that of some of the gifts that Steve Biko endowed on us is a reasonably good gene to connect ideas and to process them. And I have my own strong ideas, But my ultimate wish is really to be a community activist. That's really what I aspire to.
A community activist.
Community, one that says what needs doing in our communities and what can I do in my little world, right? And then hopefully, we can find each other with like-minded people. So to go back to conversations that I've had repeatedly with most of the presidents of AZAPO and others who are in the Black consciousness tradition, I've always said, Towers, there are things that can be articulated better by a political formation. And then there are things that can be articulated better by a foundation. Let's understand those and find a link and a bond.
And find a link.
Collectively, we can elevate the voice.
No, thank you. And I'm not sure if I should ask this question because I just feel it's an unfair question to be asking me if Nkosinathi sees himself as an AZAPO activist, and I think you have answered that question. Right now, we have run out of time, and maybe if you may just give us your closing comments as we close the session.
Right. Well, my closing comments must just go back to the tower that says, you know, we love you, we love the family. We know that we have always been a part of the Black consciousness family, the political family. And as I said, I started my remarks by paying tribute to Hlaku Rashidi. I remember Comrade Hlaku as the last president of the Black People's Convention in his regal outfit that was designed by Mama Nokuzola Magida as he led the charge to bury Steve Biko. In fact, all of them dropped whatever it is that they were doing. And there were a bunch of young leaders in their 20s to organize that major responsibility to bury Steve Biko. And throughout the ages, we have journeyed. We were in court in the case AZAPO and others. The second complainant in that case is Biko, to challenge the constitutionality of the Truth and Reconciliations Commission. But I do think that it's important that ours must also know that, at least for those that we come to interact with, they would know that we too, I think to the extent that we have been, we also reciprocate that love. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thank you, Comrade Nkosinathi Biko, for gracing us with your presence at this platform. We are very thankful to you and your family for the work that you have been doing within the Steve Biko Foundation, and the relationship that you have maintained with AZAPO over time. It doesn't necessarily follow that because Steve Biko of Black Consciousness belongs to your family, therefore you should have had those connections intact, but you've maintained those connections intact over time, and we really appreciate the work that you have done and the contribution that you continue to do as the Steve Biko Foundation and as the Biko family. We look forward to the engagement that we committed ourselves to in the coming year, and we really appreciate everybody who managed to connect to this conversation today, and look forward to the support that you continue giving us as we progress with this platform into the new year. This was our last engagement or conversation for the year, and we are going to take a recess until the beginning of the year. And we appreciate your time that you have spent with us this afternoon, and thank you very much for connecting, and let's see each other in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Listen, the struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before.